The Bamboo Lounge, Queens, January 1971. Three Italian mobsters sat across from Frank Lucas. On the table between them, a briefcase containing $5 million in cash. "That's our offer," said Carmine, the snake Persico Jr. "$5 million. You walk away from the heroin business. We take over your operation, your suppliers, your distribution, everything. You retire rich and healthy." Frank looked at the briefcase, didn't open it, didn't touch it, just stared at it for a long moment. Then he looked up at Carmine and said four words that changed everything. "Harlem's not for sale." What happened in the next 60 seconds would determine whether Frank Lucas became a legend or a corpse, whether the Italian Mafia would control New York's drug trade, or whether a black man from North Carolina would prove they couldn't buy everything. To understand why the Mafia was willing to pay $5 million to get rid of Frank Lucas, you need to understand what Frank had done to their business. For decades, the Italian mob controlled the heroin trade through the French connection. They bought morphine base from Turkey, had it converted to heroin in Marseille, smuggled it through Sicily, and distributed it through New York. The system worked because they controlled every step, and they made fortunes by cutting the heroin multiple times. Pure heroin from France would be maybe 50% pure. By the time the mob cut it and sold it on the streets, it was 10%, maybe less. Dealers had no choice but to buy from the mob. There was no other supply. You either paid their prices or you didn't sell heroin. Simple. Then in 1968, Frank Lucas changed the game. Frank went directly to Southeast Asia, to the Golden Triangle where opium poppies grew wild and heroin was manufactured at the source. He negotiated with Thai suppliers, paid them cash, cut out every middleman. Then he did something nobody else had the guts to do. He smuggled pure heroin back to America in the coffins of dead soldiers returning from Vietnam. It was brilliant, ruthless, and it destroyed the mob's monopoly. Frank's blue magic was 90% pure. He sold it for half what the mob charged. And suddenly, every dealer in Harlem, the Bronx, Brooklyn, they all wanted Frank's product instead of the mob's. By 1970, Frank Lucas was making $1 million a week. The mob was losing millions in market share. The five families held an emergency meeting in late 1970. The Genovese, Gambino, Colombo, Bonanno, and Lucchese families all sent representatives. "We have a black dealer in Harlem who's destroying our business," said Paul Vario of the Lucchese family. "He's selling better product at lower prices. Our people are defecting to him. So we kill him," said someone from the Colombo family. "We can't just kill him." Vario replied, "He's not operating in our territory. He's in Harlem. We go in there with guns, we start a war we might not win." You remember what happened with Bumpy Johnson. The room went quiet. Everyone remembered Bumpy, the black gangster who'd forced the mob to negotiate, who'd made them back down from Harlem in 1946. "So what do you suggest?" asked a Genovese captain. "We buy him out," Vario said. "Make him an offer he can't refuse. $5 million cash. He walks away, we take his operation, his suppliers, his connections. Everything becomes ours. And if he says no, then we make it clear what happens to people who say no." The decision was made. The Lucchese family would handle the negotiations, since they had the most to lose. Frank was cutting into their heroin business more than anyone else's. They sent word through an intermediary. Frank Lucas was invited to a meeting, the Bamboo Lounge in Queens. Neutral territory, just a conversation. Frank knew it wasn't just a conversation, but he went anyway. January 15, 1971, 8 p.m. Frank Lucas pulled up to the Bamboo Lounge in his Lincoln Continental. He wore a floor-length chinchilla coat worth $20,000, gold rings on every finger, a Rolex that cost more than most people's cars. He looked like money. because in 1971, Frank Lucchese was money. Red Top, his enforcer, was with him. You sure about this, boss? Could be a setup. It's always a setup, Frank said. Question is whether they're stupid enough to try something tonight. They walked into the lounge. The place was nearly empty, which told Frank everything. The mob had cleared it out. This wasn't a public meeting. 3 men sat at a booth in the back. Frank recognized them immediately. Carmine Persico Jr., a made man in the Colombo family, but doing this job for the Luccheses. Carmine was dangerous. He'd killed his first man at 17. Paul Vario, a capo in the Luccheses family. Paul ran the drug operation. This was his business being destroyed. And Jimmy the Gent Burke, an associate who worked with the Luccheses family. Jimmy was muscle, the man who'd do the killing if this went wrong. Frank walked to their table. Didn't wait to be invited. Just sat down. Red Top stood behind him, hands visible, but everyone knew he was armed. Frank Lucchese, Carmine said, smiling. Thanks for coming. You invited. I'm here. Let's talk. No pleasantries. No small talk. Frank wanted them to know he wasn't intimidated. Paul Vario leaned forward. We'll get right to it. You've built a good business. Smart business. Going direct to Asia, cutting us out. We respect the hustle. But, Frank knew there was always a but. But you're disrupting the natural order of things. The heroin business in New York has a structure, rules, and you're operating outside those rules. I'm operating in Harlem. Different neighborhood, different rules. It's all New York, Jimmy Burke said. His voice was flat, dead, and New York belongs to us. Frank looked at him. Show me the deed. Jimmy's jaw tightened, but Carmine put a hand on his arm. We're not here to threaten you, Frank. We're here to make you rich. Carmine nodded to Paul, who pulled out a briefcase from under the table, placed it on the table, opened it. Stacks of $100 bills. Neat. Organized. A fortune. $5 million, Carmine said. Cash. Untraceable. You walk away from the heroin business. Give us your supplier contacts in Thailand, your distribution network, your routes, everything. You take this money and retire, buy a mansion, live like a king. Never worry about police, competition, or anything else. Frank looked at the money. $5 million in 1971 was equivalent to about $35 million today. Generational wealth. Enough to set up his family for life. And if I say no, Carmine closed the briefcase, then we have a problem, because we can't let you continue destroying our business. One way or another, your operation ends. The question is whether you walk away rich or whether you don't walk away at all. It wasn't a subtle threat. It was a direct one. The entire restaurant was silent. Red Top's hand moved closer to his waistband. Jimmy Burke shifted in his seat, ready to move. Frank Lucchese looked at these 3 Italian mobsters, men who'd killed dozens of people between them, men who represented families that had controlled New York for 50 years. And he said 4 words. Harlem's not for sale. Carmine blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. Harlem's not for sale. My operation's not for sale. My not for sale. Paul Vario's face reddened. You're making a mistake, Frank. A big mistake. No, Frank said calmly. You're making the mistake. You think because you've controlled this business for decades, you'll always control it. You think because you're Italian and I'm black, I should just bow down and take your money. But that's not how this works. He leaned forward. I built my operation from nothing. I went to Thailand when none of you had the guts to go. I negotiated with suppliers who didn't even know who you were. I created a product better than anything you've ever sold. And you think you can just walk in here with a briefcase and buy all that? $5 million, Carmine started. $5 million is nothing, Frank interrupted. I make $1 million a week. In 5 weeks, I'll make what you're offering. In a year, I'll make 10 times that. Why would I trade my empire for a one-time payment? Jimmy Burke stood up. You're not hearing what we're saying. Red Top pulled his gun, not pointing it at anyone, just visible. A reminder. Frank didn't even look at Jimmy. Kept his eyes on Carmine. Here's what I'm hearing. You're losing money because I'm better at this than you. You're scared because for the first time in your lives you don't control the market, and instead of competing, you want to buy me out. That tells me you can't beat me. We can destroy you, Paul Vario said quietly. You can try, Frank replied, but you seem to forget where I operate. Harlem, not Little Italy, not your neighborhood. Mine. You come into Harlem trying to kill me, and you'll have problems you can't imagine. Every street corner, every building, every person, they're on my side, not yours. He stood up. I appreciate the offer. I really do. $5 million is a lot of money, but my answer is no. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. You're going to keep doing what you're doing, and we'll see who's still standing in a year. Frank buttoned his chinchilla coat. Enjoy your evening, gentlemen. He turned to leave. Red Top backed up, keeping his gun visible, eyes on all three mobsters. They made it to the door. Out to the parking lot, into the car. As they pulled away, Red Top exhaled. They're going to come after you now. I know. Was it worth it? You could have taken $5 million and disappeared. Frank looked out the window at the lights of Queens passing by. If I took that money, I'd be admitting they're in charge, that Harlem belongs to them, that I'm just another dealer they can buy off. But I'm not. He lit a cigar. I'd rather die fighting than live knowing I sold out. For 2 weeks, Frank waited for retaliation. Hired extra security, moved locations every night, warned his people to be careful, but nothing happened. Because behind the scenes, the commission, the ruling body of the 5 families, had made a decision. Paul Castellano, who was rising in the Gambino family, argued against hitting Frank. We go to war with this guy. It costs us money, time, resources, and we might not even win. Harlem's not like Brooklyn. We don't control it. Let him operate. As long as he stays in his lane, we stay in ours. Others agreed. The cost of war with Frank Lucas was higher than the cost of letting him operate independently. It was the same calculation the mob had made with Bumpy Johnson in 1946. Sometimes the smartest move is to leave certain people alone. Frank Lucas's refusal to sell became legend in Harlem. The story spread through the streets within days. Frank turned down $5 million from the mob. They tried to buy him out and he said no. He told them Harlem's not for sale. That phrase, Harlem's not for sale, became a rallying cry. It represented independence, pride, the refusal to bow to outside forces. Young dealers looked up to Frank not just because he was rich, but because he'd stood up to the Mafia and won. But Frank's victory came with a cost. The mob couldn't control him, but they could watch him, report him. And when the DEA finally started investigating Frank Lucas in 1973, there were whispers that information came from anonymous sources with Italian accents. The mob couldn't kill Frank, couldn't buy him, but they could help the federal government destroy him. In January 1975, 4 years after he turned down $5 million, Frank Lucas was arrested. His empire crumbled. He eventually cooperated with authorities and served 7 years in prison. Years later, after his release, a journalist asked Frank about that night at the Bamboo Lounge. Do you regret saying no to $5 million? Frank thought about it. Sometimes, when I was sitting in prison, I thought about that briefcase, about what my life could have been if I'd just taken the money. But then I remember why I said no. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about not letting them dictate my life. If I'd taken that deal, I'd have spent the rest of my life knowing I gave up, that I sold out, and that would have been worse than prison. So you'd do it again? Frank smiled. In a heartbeat. The Bamboo Lounge closed in 1983. The building was demolished in 1991. But the story of what happened there in January 1971 lived on. In Harlem, They still tell it. About the night Frank Lucas sat across from three mobsters, looked at $5 million, and said no. About the 4 words that proved money can't buy everything. About the moment when a black man from North Carolina made the Italian Mafia back down. Carmine Persico Jr. died in prison in 2019. Paul Vario died in 1988. Jimmy Burke died in prison in 1996. Frank Lucas died in 2019 at age 88. He'd outlived all of them. And to the very end, when people asked him about his greatest moment, he didn't talk about the millions he made. He didn't talk about blue magic or the heroin empire. He talked about the night he told the Mafia no. That, Frank would say, was when I knew I was more than just a dealer. I was a king, and kings don't sell their kingdoms. If this story about pride, power, and the 4 words that changed everything inspired you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you believe some things are worth more than money. Comment below, would you have taken the 5 million or would you have said no? Like Frank. Turn on notifications because next week we're revealing how Frank Lucas built his blue magic empire from a single trip to Thailand and why his method changed drug trafficking forever. Remember, in the criminal underworld, respect is currency, and Frank Lucas never sold out.